Hi there, welcome to this year's English language welcome session. My name's Thomas Wheeler and I'm the head of the English department here at Woking College. If you have any questions at any point from any of the kind of content raised today, please just drop me an email at twh@woking.ac.uk. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through a short session just giving you a rough idea of what it's like to study the course of English language here at Woking College, and kind of go through kind of a couple of things. We're going to have a look at the course overall. We're going to go through some key concepts for this session itself. We're going to do some short analytical tasks building from kind of smaller to larger ones, and then you've got a chance for us to evaluate and push this as far as you want, really. There's loads of stuff you can dive into here today, so hopefully it's really useful for you. After that, I'll remind you of my email address and that you can get a hold of me, and if you have any further questions and you want further support in terms of making your choice to get onto this course. Okay, so let's crack on. So here we have, today we're going to be looking at ideology, representation and language, and we're going to be looking at Black Lives Matter protests, particularly focusing on those in the US. Though obviously feel free to extend this actually. I mean, I would say this, because of the nature of the English language course, everything we do here is just a start. You can extend and attach and apply any of the concepts we do here to kind of broader language topics and research that you can do in your own time. So the course itself, it's a 2-exam course. We use the exam board OCR, so you can look it up there if you wish to. So A-level English language OCR will be fine to get hold of the specification. And there's two exams and 2 coursework tasks. So the 2 coursework tasks are linked together closely. Okay, so it's, balances the 2 there. The first exam is called Exploring Language. The first exam is called Exploring Language and focuses on exploring written text, spoken text, and other kind of various forms of genre to look at some language issues and comparing a wide range of different texts. So it's kind of a more focused one. It also has a chance for you to create a kind of response to a topic area within the subject. The second exam is called Dimensions of Linguistic Variation, and that explores a couple of specific topics in terms of how children acquire language, how the media manipulates language, and how language has changed over time. So lots of stuff to kind of cover across the 2 exams. The coursework then is an independent written investigation into a chosen topic from kind of anything within the scope of what we've studied, and an accompanying academic poster which kind of encourages a more a kind of mixing of your kind of creative abilities alongside your ability to communicate information and research in a really clear and engaging manner. So there's loads of different ideas and content to go through. Hopefully today's session will give you a brief insight into one of those topics, which we're looking at is from the second exam, and that is the language in the media exam. So language in the media in general is what we're going to be looking at, and today we're going to be exploring a couple of things, mostly ideas of representation. So this is going to be kind of basically our kind of key concept for the session really, along with ideology here, which will help. But we're going to be looking at essentially representation, which is how media institutions present events, people, places, things, and how this influences their audience. So what we're often looking at with this module is how an audience is kind of treated by and led into believing various things off the back of decisions made by the producers, i.e. the reporters, the websites, whatever, in terms of how they use their language. Okay, so the language an institution uses often reflects and reinforces their own ideology and often cultural dominant ideology. So an ideology is a system of ideas and ideals, especially one which forms the basis of kind of economic, political, social, cultural theories. Okay, so you will hold various ideologies, you will probably subscribe to some national ones, and you might have your own that separate from them. Anyone who is writing in a political space will be writing for a publication, and all publications will hold a specific political standpoint, whether it is overt or not. Those standpoints will then obviously influence how they present their texts, and that leads to these ideas of representation that we're talking about here today. So we're going to be looking at this article here. The title is Absolute Chaos in Minneapolis as Protests Grow Across the US. So this was taken early on from the kind of Black Lives Matter protests, following George Floyd's death. And I've got the article title here and a thumbnail from the video that was chosen to lead this. It was the original article was in the form of a kind of live updated article. So like many news institutions now, there was a real focus in this piece on going into and using a kind of updated live across the course of a day structure. So what I want you to do to start with here is to take this initial video thumbnail before we get into the language, if you want, although there is obviously a heading here. I want you to take the image that we start with before we get into any of the actual text. I want you to tell me who is being represented here, how are they being represented, and why has this image been chosen, do you think, by this institution? And we're not going to go into who it is yet, I'll talk about that at the end. But, you know, who is it? Who is this? Why is this image the one that has been chosen? What does that suggest? Pause the video here, take note, get down your ideas, and we will come back to this in a second. Okay, hopefully you got some good content out of this image here, particularly fiery shot chosen as the thumbnail with the powerful stance here, suggesting certainly perhaps a familiar image for those of you who have seen news reporting on riots and the like before. So hopefully we can kind of dive into that quite nicely. The pillar of fire, it's characterizing certainly, isn't it? The protesters in here certainly more as violent. As well as that, we can have a look at the language of the title for this video here. Protesters confront police at Minneapolis precinct. Now, there's a lot to dig into in that title, and specifically from a language front, I want to get into one particular choice that they've made here. So let's have a look at some close language analysis. So this is also from the New York Times' Twitter account. And I want you to just have a look at these two tweets here. So hopefully nice and legible. Before we obviously have a look at the core text of this article itself, let's have a look at something a little bit more condensed where we can see directly how even simple language changes can have huge impacts on meaning and representation. So these were two tweets that came out around the original incident and events surrounding. Firstly, we have this phrase here. Mayor Jacob Frey, I guess, of Minneapolis tweeted Tuesday afternoon that 4 officers involved in the arrest of a man who died after being handcuffed and pinned to the ground by an officer's knee had been fired, and a separate one saying, Minneapolis, a photographer was shot in the eye. Washington, D.C., protesters struck a journalist with his own microphone. Louisville, a reporter was hit by a pepper ball on live television by an officer who appeared to be aiming at her. So, what differences can you notice in the language used between these tweets, and even the different phrases in the second one? There's 3 different kind of versions there. How do they change the nature of each event? So look at how they're presented and how that changes the nature of each version that has been reported on here, and try and give me a comment as to what the effect of those different presentations is. So again, I'll give you a pause here, and then we'll turn in a second. So hopefully you got some kind of implied similarities and differences going on there, and some of the ways in which they link together. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through some of the technicalities of why they are phrased and how they are phrased differently and the effects they have. So this is an issue of what we would call active and passive voice. So in terms of usage, now active voice is a structuring. Well, let's break it down. So sentences usually will need to be complete this relationship between a verb and often a subject. So somebody, the thing or person who is the active party in a sentence. A verb, as a reminder for everybody, is a action, a doing word. So an example of an active voice sentence is where the subject of the sentence, the person or thing doing the thing, comes before the verb. So for an example, I kicked a ball. Separately, a passive voice is where the subject of a sentence comes after the verb. So a ball was kicked by me. In that circumstance as well, obviously it's quite easy to delete the subject, yeah? a ball was kicked, whereas kicked a ball doesn't really make any sense. It's harder to delete that subject there in that active voice structuring. So in these tweets, you'll find that the actions of the police were all placed in various types of passive voice. This diminishes the responsibility of their actions, whereas the kind of characterized as writers, well, the protesters as they're presented are presented in the active voice, which places the focus on them as being responsible. So when we look at this, Minneapolis, a photographer was shot in the eye. By whom? They were just shot. It just happened randomly out of coincidence. Whereas in Washington, protesters struck a journalist with his own microphone. So that gives you a certain indication as to where and how the news institutes here are trying to present these riots. This is taken from an article from Medium, which you can go into on more depth. If you want to search this article up afterwards, I would really recommend reading it. It's really interesting. But they says, when news organisations write headlines, they should stay in active voice. It's generally more objective, it's reporting in the traditional sense, and gives the reader a clear understanding of what happened, who, what, where, when, why, how. However, journalists are conscious of the power their wording has and make choices about whether they will assume active or passive voice. They know that, unfortunately, active voice can have come across as more accusatory, even if it is the reporting of verifiable facts or reasonable news framing. So when they are writing about things that reflect negatively on certain institutions or people, the state, the army, the police, etc., they may feel compelled to write in a passive voice. For example, a village in Afghanistan was demolished after an airstrike the US took part in. So that's an extract from an article there that you can read a little bit further. It gets you into some of these issues around active and passive voice. So let's go back to the start of the article here. The title, Absolute Chaos in Minneapolis. That's in quotation marks there. As protests grow around the US. Minnesota's governor said the police and National Guard had been overwhelmed by protests, which raged even after a former police officer was charged with murdering George Floyd. So look at who violence is attributed to, if at all. How is the environment represented around these protests? How are events framed? Who reports what here? And who is being used to tell the story? So which people's voices are being heard in this text? So this is just the introduction here. This is the here's what you need to know. Have a pause of the video. Have a look at these questions. And then we're going to continue. Okay, so hopefully you've had a look there at the opening section of this article. What I'm going to recommend you do now is open up the full article itself. If you want to copy and paste the web address from the video, you can do, or you can just search for this article from the New York Times. So the same institution that published those tweets that we looked at previously. And the article there should have a full text response, and it's several pages long, so nothing I could show on the video, unfortunately. So what I'd like to do is then pause the video and read through the article, paying close attention to the writer's choice of language, so lexis, their words, and syntax, their sentence structures. So we've looked at a little bit of example of both previously, and then complete the table below, where I've filled out a couple of entries for you already on the first column. So that is who or what is being represented. So the police and protesters. Make sure that you see how that language is consistent there. And then you can add any other groups or places or things. So that could be other institutions than the police. That could be the city itself. That could be other groups of people, politicians, whoever else. So you can add as many layers to that as you want, to go in as much detail as you want to. Have a look at how they are being represented. So to support that with some quotes from the text, that would be great. And images, linking about that link between images and text. And then why do you think this institution has chosen to represent these things like that? Have a look at why you think and what you think the effect is of the New York Times presenting the police in the way that they do and the protesters in the way they do. What does that tell us about the beliefs and values of those institutions? Okay. Ultimately, guys, that will, pause the video there. That'll take as long as you need on that one. Hopefully loads to dig into there. Plenty of ideas, obviously. Feel free to email me any of the interpretations you get. So in terms of influential power, then, so this is ultimately boiling down to the key thing here. And this is where, fundamentally, this issue kind of comes to kind of its head. Influential power is the ways in which individuals or groups can influence us and manipulate us with the language they choose to use. What messages do the writers of this article want to convey, and how do they achieve this with rhetorical devices? What are they using? What persuasive language they're using, patterning? How are they representing the individuals? How are they using visuals alongside this? How are they changing the structure of their sentences to kind of influence us and lead us to where they want us to be in terms of ideas? Okay, so hopefully that was a nice, or at least an interesting dive into how language can be used subtly and unsubtly to change the way in which you feel about the world around you. And think about this, guys. This is how everything is reported. Well, things are reported to us, and that should hopefully give us a kind of an insight into how we engage with our world. As I said, if you want to take this further, have a look at the way in which the protests around London over the last several weeks have been presented, and how different groups of protesters have been treated by different media organisations. Should give you a good idea in terms of how media institutions incorporate their own ideological politics into their language usage and presentation. Hopefully that was interesting for you all, and I really look forward to seeing as many of you possible in the near future. Thank you so much.